views expressed in this webinar do not necessarily represent the views, policies, and positions of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Today's webinar will be Native Connections Approach Part 3, Crisis Response and Postvention Planning. I'm Joe Lewis, and I'll be your facilitator for today. And I'll be doing the moderating for this webinar. Facilitator for today will be Vicki Lafamboise, and I will turn it over to Vicki at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Before we start, I would like to start with just some good words to open us up just with the sensitivity of the topic. I would just like to, take a minute to offer everybody to open their minds, have open minds, that I have the right words, that people hear the words right, and that we are able to take this information and create good postvention policies for our communities. And another thing I would like to share with you is my Indian name comes home with a victory. It's really hard to say in Blackfeet. When I got the name about 30 years ago, I had it written down by an elder from Canada. And I referred to this piece of paper all the time. One day my ex-husband got mad at me and ripped this piece of paper up. And when he ripped the piece of paper up, I totally lost how to say it. And I asked my brother and sister-in-law all the time, how do I say my name in Blackfeet? And they said, that's not the important thing. The important thing is how you got the name and what does it mean. And it's really important to me in the work that I do that I'm able to give you some things that maybe you are able to go home with a victory with the information that I give to you, and that this information helps to cease the suicides in your communities, and like I said, that you are able to go home with a victory, and going home with a victory with a good postvention plan. So with that, I'm going to start the webinar. So a behavioral health crisis is not the inevitable consequences of mental health illnesses. But when one does occur, many factors can contribute, including the lack of mental health, the lack of access to essential services and supports, such as poverty, unstable housing, coexisting mental illnesses, substance use disorders, other health problems, discrimination, and victimization. Clarifying the concept of suicide contagion is an essential step for more thoroughly investigating its mechanisms. Developing a clearer understanding of the apparent spread of suicide-promoting influences can in turn offer insights necessary to build the scientific foundation prevention and intervention strategies that can be applied at both individual and community levels. Suicide contagion. What is it? It is a group of suicides or suicide attempts, or both, that occur closer together in time and in space than normally would be expected in a given community. It is also known as a copycat suicide. It is this behavior that leads to clusters of suicides. It is the exposure to suicide or suicidal behaviors within one's family, one's peer group, or through media reports of suicide, and can result in an increase in suicide and suicidal behaviors. It is because of direct and indirect exposure to the suicidal behavior. The risk for suicidal contagion as a result of media reporting can be minimized by factual and concise media reports of the suicide. Reports by the media should not be glorified. One or more suicides within a community can trigger additional suicides and attempts, especially when you look at the relationship of the people that the suicide or the attempts occurred. There's been lots of research on contagions or clusters, copycats. It shows that risk goes up even if a child doesn't personally know the deceased student. It's 5 times more likely to have a suicidal thought with teens that have unexposed to death, especially if the individual does not get any help. Or counseling when they have been exposed to this death, especially by suicide. This one study in Canada shows that there were 22 Canadian children aged 12 to 17. They were asked if anyone in their school or anyone knew or personally had died by suicide. Researchers found that 12 to 13-year-old children were at greater risk and were 5 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts than the teens who had not been exposed to death. According to the study, 7.5% of these children attempted suicide after a fellow student, schoolmate, had attempted. According to Madeline Gold, evidence has accumulated to support the idea that suicidal behavior is contagious in that it can be transmitted directly or indirectly from one person to another. This evidence is derived from 3 bodies of research: studies that impact of media reporting on the suicide, studies of suicide clusters, and studies of impact on adolescents of the exposure to their suicidal peer. So how can we prevent these suicidal contagions? It's important to find out the individual support system. For one, it might be their friends, their family, music. Food might even be a support system for them. For another, it might be family, friends, or spirituality. Take the time to find out the individual's support system that are left behind. Surround them with a positive support system. One EDI program to consider is the sources of strength. It has 8 strengths, factors that research has shown are protective factors against suicide risk: mental health, family support, positive friends, mentors, healthy activities, generosity, spirituality, and medical access. Again, preventing suicide contagions, Postvention protocol provides services along with a strength of connections with protective factors to those who were affected by the suicide incident, be it a death by suicide or an attempt or even some ideations. It's important to know the resources, which include the need to understand the risk and protective factors associated with the contagion. It's important to know the risk as well as the protective factors. Know your resources. Offer support or find out the support system. Again, this is what we found out in the previous slide. Comfort the person. Offer comfort in any way that you can. One of the risk factors in contagions is assuming blame for the person's death. Be there to comfort them and let them know that they weren't necessarily the reason for the person's death or the reason for them to attempt. Prayer is healing. Offer up prayers if this is the person's support system. Pray together if this is one of their support systems, and also offer that you will put them out on the prayer chains as well. Healing. Healing is another risk. Healing offers a way to help a risk factor in pre-existing trauma. And the person affected needs to be healed in a good way. This is the Native Connections approach is all about informed healing and healing on all of our traumatic experiences that we may have had. So who may be at risk? The family of the person involved should be considered for postvention services. The school should be involved, as well as the community, the family, just anybody, especially if the event is involved with somebody at school, from school. We need to identify the individuals at risk. Family, they should be considered for postvention services. The schools, of course, our youth that are in school, they spend, 70% of their time at school. So you definitely want to identify those at school, especially those that can be of support for them at the school. You want to identify those that had close relationships with the deceased, those that may have witnessed the event, or maybe those that came upon contact with them after the event. Those that had contact with the deceased with histories of personal losses or exposure to other suicides, with histories of previous suicide attempts or drug or alcohol abuse in their own personal life. Or maybe they responded to this event as a first responder or somebody on the crisis response team. We don't know what's going to trigger somebody else to have any incidents. I'm sorry, I forgot to identify at the beginning of the webinar that we have Deborah Rattler and David Braveheart, in case this triggers anything for you. Dave and Deborah will be available on private chat, and they will also be available for resources for you after the webinar in case you have to need to talk or just anything if this might trigger something for you. Sorry, I didn't identify that at the beginning. So after Robin Williams' suicide, this tweet was tweeted over 270,000 times, and according to one of the stats taker thing on here, this reached over 69 million people, just this picture. And what it's saying is, Jeannie, you're free. What it is actually it's giving a mixed message to those. We don't really know, that that's the right message to be saying. So, the problem with this picture is it violates a well-established public health standards for how we talk about postvention activities. It brings up some things to talk about when we are discussing postvention. One of the fights that we have is winning the media's support when we're talking about suicide, completed deaths, or even talking about media when we're talking about postvention plans. So with this said, we need to talk about glorifying suicides. What does glorifying mean? The word glorifying itself means to cause or to be treated more splendid, excellent than it would normally be considered. To glorify a suicide or glorify a death. To glorify a military life. How do we do this in Indian communities? How do we consider not glorifying death? It's a lot of times it's our traditions to hold memorials. On page 36 in the To Live to See the Great Day That Dawns, on the bottom of page 36, there's a little box, and it says to seek the advice of the elders. And really do that. Check into your community, check in with the elders, check in with the families of those that have died. For example, one of the grantees that I work with, it's been probably 2 or 3 years since this young person has died by suicide. But there's a coffee place that has a coffee named after this individual. And for a while, they were really glorifying and really saying that this was this person's coffee because they died by suicide. Well, because of the work that we've done with Postvention and Native Connections, and they also have a Garrett Lee Smith grant, we've talked to the coffee place and we said, is there maybe something else we can do? Maybe we can, you can still have the coffee in this person's name, but maybe we can do something, can we add some suicide prevention materials along with this, especially in the month of September because it is Suicide Prevention Month. Another way to stop glorifying this is to add media on your side. Research the impact that media has on stories about suicide, how it has demonstrated suicide. The media has done, sometimes it has increased the rates of suicide after the notification or increased media exposure of a death. In this case, around Kurt Cobain's death, Robin Williams' death, we've seen an increase in suicidal deaths. More than 50 studies on non-fictional stories reported in newspapers and on television show that, and on the internet, that they have yielded constant increase in suicides. When you are interacting with media, always have one person as a point of contact, and make sure that they always report the facts. Just the facts. Don't bring up stories or hearsay. Just always keep to the facts. The media can be an aid and an ally to you. Again, it's always keeping to the facts and keeping it on a positive notion. So what is postvention? It is activities that occur after the event, an attempt, or a death to reduce the risk of those that have been affected. There's no timeline for grieving. So, one thing that in talking to somebody about this is, we have to think about timeliness when we're talking about some of these things. So, you're not going to want to go to somebody right away and say, we need to talk about this and what can we do for your family right now when they're sitting there and they're, grieving their family. You might want to maybe wait a week. And it's knowing who you're working with as well. Accept the intensity of the survivor's grief. Listen with their hearts. Avoid simplistic explanation and cliches. Show compassion. Respect the survivor's need to grieve. Understand the uniqueness of the suicide grief. Be aware of holidays and anniversaries when this time comes around because, as Indian people and just as people, it is our nature to honor these deaths as the anniversaries go around. Be aware of support groups to offer to these people that are grieving. Respect the person's faith and spirituality. If their way of life is to follow the traditional ways, respect that and show them that way. If their spirituality is to follow the Catholic ways, respect that and offer them things that go along that way. And work together as a helper for the family and the people that are left behind. Again, this is a death. It may be by suicide, but, it's just the way that we honor these things. This is the Native Connection approach, and again, this is where we should be. We're down in the gold, and you should be thinking about planning your postvention activities and identifying the systems and the departments that you'll want to be working together with, especially when creating your crisis response team. So developing your postvention plan. Your postvention protocols are supportive and necessarily acts that are implemented to prevent the suicide clusters or contagions or even copycat suicides. It is a community's effort to develop a plan will be similar to the efforts to develop a broader suicide prevention plan. So it should be included in your SAP. The community will need to understand the risk and protective factors, and also need to know their readiness, their community readiness as well, because you don't want to really do a lot of things that are way out of the readiness. And you also need to know the risk factors. What trauma, what historical trauma exists in that community, and how have we overcome this? How have we dealt with this trauma in our community before? Assume that people are going to be there blaming themselves for this person's death. A community should consider postvention as part of their overall plan rather than try to develop a whole different plan, but this should be included in your plan. Remember that the community is going to be in shock when this happens, especially if it's a influential person, somebody that has interacted with everybody in the community. Avoid glorifying the suicide again. Work with the media. Offer support to the families and friends of the victim. Identify vulnerable relatives and friends and family. And one important thing is to offer counseling. Don't offer it at your normal 8 to 5. Offer some times that are going to be helpful to the people that are grieving. This always doesn't happen at 8 to 5. Maybe at 8 o'clock in the evening, somebody's going to have a hard time. So maybe have a line that they could call, or just know that they can go and talk to somebody at 8 o'clock, just for a couple of weeks or a little bit of time after the death or after the event has happened. I'm going to turn this over to Joe Lewis to do a poll question at this time.
Thank you, Vicki. So for our first poll question, we're going to have 2 for this webinar.
Thank you, Vicki. So for the first poll question, we're going to have 2 for this webinar. The first poll question is, who should be in your crisis response team? So you can pick multiple choices. The first one is project director, then project coordinator, advisory group members, tribal leaders, local schools, GPO, mental health and social services, Native Connections coordinator, community including youth and elders, and law enforcement. So we'll give the poll a little bit time, and we'll broadcast the results. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and broadcast the results, and so everyone can see what a lot of you are choosing.
Okay. Thank you for responding to this. This looks great to have your project director, your coordinator. We did put a couple people in here just to see if people were paying attention, and if your government project officer was in your area and they were willing to be on your crisis response team, that would be great. But that was one that we just added in there to see if people were paying attention and all that. And then the NC coordinator is people like me and Joe Lewis, Deborah, Dave Braveheart as well. But all these people, you really should be considered being on your crisis response team. And you want us to also think about having it as a manageable amount of people too. So, not too overwhelming, but enough people to cover what you need to cover on a response team. Thank you again for responding. So why should we plan postvention activities? They help the community heal from a traumatic event or suicide. They help prevent the suicide contagion, and they help strengthen the community resilience. They let the school and community know what to do. They can relay information about the event, the factual information about the event, and maybe the family's plans for the wake, the funeral, things like that. It mobilizes a pre-planned strategy. It could designate an area for counseling, again, and designated times after the regular hours for counseling. It can send out a unified message that's already pre-planned. Self-care for all involved, that should be included in the postvention activities. And it helps the community at all levels, and it helps the community heal. At this time, I would like to introduce Anthony Shackelford from Osage Nation.
Good afternoon.
Oh.
Well, Vicki and I were speaking the other day, and my perspective is going to be from the Osage point of view, and Vicki and I had a great conversation last week, and I tend to be a little long-winded, so she asked me if I could keep it to 10 or 15 minutes, so excuse my brevity here, but, whenever in Osage, it's a small community, it's a wide service area in Oklahoma, in the northeastern part of Oklahoma, but the service area itself actually is 1.5 million acres, so it's comparable to the size of Delaware and even larger than Rhode Island. So I mean, it's mainly rural areas, but yet the predominant tribe in Osage County obviously is the Osage tribe, and a very tight knit group of people. A lot of the elders used to talk about saying that all Osages are kin to one another in a good way, if not blood, and through that friendship, through those ties that bind. And so when we were talking about the postvention, as far as the Osage is concerned, is that when we have that loss, it doesn't only affect the community, but it affects the family. And it's kind of like throwing a rock into a pond. The ripple effect is sometimes it's overwhelming. And so, like Vicki was talking about earlier, I think whenever we go into to approach people that are suffering, they're in a bad time in their lives because they've lost that loved one, regardless of who is the person talking to the families or anything like that, it's the timing is very, very crucial. Having lost an older brother of mine to accidental overdose, I'm pretty familiar with that process. And sometimes there's better times. There's no good time, but there's better times than others. And so I think with the mindfulness, we have to keep that in perspective of whenever we're talking to these people. And like I was speaking with Vicki the other day, I think a big part of that is that when people would come and visit my family, we always made it a point once that loved one is gone, we want to make sure that they're never alone. So from the time my brother, was at the hospital, and then we made sure that he was always with me or one of my brothers from the time that he traveled from the hospital to the funeral home and to my father's home, and then out to the chapel, which the Osage tribe has provided for families. Is that a lot of times those families, the services are so large that it's just being able to accommodate 200 to 300, 500 people plus, and so we're really blessed. The tribe has taken the time and the money and the effort and the thoughtfulness to provide a place for our loved ones to lie in state. And so whenever you're going into a lot of those, there's a lot of decisions, and again, Vicki made a lot of good points as far as there has to be kind of a point of contact for the family, and normally it's a close friend, a relative, or someone that's has the ability to have that strength to be able to deal with a lot of decisions have to be made at that time, and some of those decisions are you're talking about food, you're talking about dinners, you're talking about people to speak for that loved one, someone to go down and dress that loved one before the viewing, and you always want to have someone that's their heart's in the right place, and you always have a lot of people reaching out wanting to help you, and so. Again, a family that's suffering, it's very overwhelming. So if you have someone that can can kind of be the lead on that for the family. It really makes things a lot easier for the family during a very difficult time, because sometimes if you have too many people trying to help, and then things get confused, and so then they ultimately come to the family, and the family needs to be grieving. They don't really need to be worrying about a lot of the things that need to be taken care of. And so I think that's a very important part, is the timing and someone that can help lead that effort. The Osage Way, a lot of times, we incorporate, and a lot of tribes, I think, a lot of tribes are unique in the way that they do things, but I think one thing that all tribes across this great country observe is they have that closeness to their culture, whether it's language, whether it's, the clothes that we wear during our celebrations, whether it's a value system of how we were raised and how our parents or grandparents were taught things back before the arrival of Eastern Europeans to this continent. So, there's a lot of things that go back a long way, and they're good ways. And we've tried to hold them close as we can with change that goes on. It's inevitable sometimes, and you have to kind of make some adaptions and things like that, because back in the old days, a lot of the tribal members lived within a day ride on a horse or a buggy from home sites. And so now people are living across the country and in different countries. And so, again, you have to be mindful of those things, and you want to be surrounded by your loved ones. And so that's why we always, the first option, if we can, we want to bring them to our home and let them be at home. And people are always bringing things to you, whether it's a blanket, if they're bringing food, if they're offering their services. Again, it's all stuff that, when you got hundreds of people approaching you over a short period of time, it's just, it's a big load. And again, receiving all that love, it's an amazing thing. And I think it's something I believe that's shared among all tribal nations, and I think that's a uniqueness that we all share. Another thing that we share, I think, is people would come to me and I'd be visiting with them, and they'd want to know, someone would be telling me a funny story, or I'd share a funny story about my brother, and they'd look at me and they'd be like, how can you be laughing at a time like this? And my response was, I said, I'm tired of crying. And I said, I think that my brother and for my own self-preservation too, is that I think laughter and sharing a good story about that person that brings a smile to your face, and you keep that warmth and that funniness, about that person, because that's who they were, and you're going to grieve plenty, but part of the grieving process and part of the healing process, I do believe, is being able to smile and laugh and think about good things, because you're in a dark place, losing that person. So, I think whenever you can kind of braid those things together, I think it helps you, kind of come out of that low spot where life again starts being a good thing for you. Again, the importance of like we always open the casket up at daybreak, and we select someone, whether it's a tribal elder or someone that's the lead of one of our clans, and have them say some good things about that loved one, and the same thing in the evening time at midnight when the close of that day, is that you have someone stand up and they voice for the family and they say those good things and those those assurances that there's life beyond this life that we know now. And so I think that's important for the family to hear those things, because you don't want to let go. That's one of the toughest parts about losing someone is letting go. And at some point you have to. But you can always carry them with you, in your heart and your memories and things like that. But again, my mother always told me that, it's okay to grieve. That's part of the healing process. But, never grieve too hard. It shows the way she was taught is that sometimes those loved ones, they won't go on to where they need to go, and they'll turn back. And so you want them to, with the natural unfolding of life and death, you want things to have their proper place, and the process needs to be complete. And we always respect those 4 days laying in state, and it's important that we observe those. One of the things that we do with our loved ones, sometimes we may put a feather in the casket, with the loved one. And people that understand that way, like Victoria was talking about earlier, whether it's Catholic or you're a member of the Native American Church, and there's certain things or processes that go with all of those different beliefs. And that feathers, it's always from a golden eagle, because that's the bird that flies the highest, Tulokanto, which is the Osage word for God. And so we always hold that in high reverence. And so it's important that people that do want that and with their person, with their loved one, that we respect those ways. And if they don't, that's okay too. We respect the family's wishes. Being able to have someone that's, been through, that's an elder, I think it's always important to look to them, because they've been down that road, and they always said that, my father, he's had to bury 2 sons, and so that's kind of out of the way that life needs to be unfolding. A lot of us believe that that's a hard thing to do, and so I've seen a lot of hurt in my dad's eyes over the years, because he had 5 boys, and so it's really hard to be able to sit down and talk with him about the reason why or these things like that. People always want to know why, and a lot of times that's not the important thing. It's just the important thing is to be there to comfort those people and help them through a tough time, and to support them in the best way you know how. And one of the things that we always use at our funerals is that we have that cedar. That cedar is the tree. It stays green year round. It's life year round, and it's used to cleanse things. To let if you have a heavy heart and things are are weighing on you. And you can bless yourself with that cedar and that eagle fan and wash your hands with that water and things like that. That's cleansing you. And allowing you to take that next step going on with the rest of your life. And again, like I said, we cook that last meal for that loved one. We select someone that's, again, a lot of good people wanting to help, and it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to pick that one to help do those things. But again, they prepare that last meal for that loved one, and we always, put that food, put it in the lunch pail and put it in that casket with them for their journey on to the other side of the sun. That's very important with our people. Is that, and so whenever the people that have come there to support you, and sometimes, like I said, it's 300, 400, 500 people. You're sitting there and you're sharing that last meal, and you're thinking good thoughts, and you look across that room, and a lot of the eyes are filled with tears. The days leading up to that or have been changed with smiles, and you can tell that burden has gotten a little bit lighter over those 4 days, And so I think the healing process and the postvention part of things is starting to take effect right then. But again, there's just a lot of things that that the Osages do, and I think a lot of the other tribes. I guess I've never had the opportunity to go to a lot of funerals from other tribes, but from what I hear, is that they got good ways to it. And never having been there, I know that they do, because I know they're Indian people. And I know that that's something that we all share, is that way of life, and we respect that in that other world too. So again, whenever Vicki and I spoke the other day, I tried to give her some of the thoughts and the feelings and the passions and the compassions and things that we have here at the Osage Nation, and hopefully the ability to share a little bit of what we go through whenever we lose a loved one is something that maybe if you guys are going through some of that, or if you have something similar to that, I think you know what I'm talking about. And again, just be there for those people. It's not so much what we know; it's just that our willingness to sit there and listen to them and support them through a tough time. And again, thank you for this opportunity to share just a little bit of what we do here in the Osage country.
Thank you, Anthony. That's beautiful what the Osage people do for Postvention. When I was speaking with Daisy, the project coordinator from Osage, and we were talking about crisis response with some of the things that they're doing with the schools, and she said, this is what we do for our people that die at Osage. And then she told me the process, and then all of a sudden it was an aha moment. And that's their postvention. That's their cultural postvention. That's what they do. And I think that's one important thing that we need to remember is that culture is prevention, And it's important to add these pieces into our postvention, add this important piece of our everyday lives that we do into this. So again, thank you so much. And when I was speaking with Anthony the other day, he told me when he said the part about laughing with his brother and stuff, he said, you got to keep your heart warm, keep your heart light. This helps the heart heal better. This stuck with me, and I've actually said this probably about 3 times over the long weekend. So, Anthony, you've given me one of my new favorite quotes. So, again, thank you so much for your beautiful presentation.
Thank you very much. Again, it's really humbling to be able to just offer a little bit of what we do here, and I think that when people are at that point in their life where they're Indian people, it's hard to ask for help sometimes, and I think that the one thing that I think that all Indian people do, I think they come to you at the moment when you need them the most, and I think that's a uniqueness that we share, across all tribal groups, is that we all understand that closeness to our loved ones, and it's hard to let go, but yet whenever you have people that come to your home and when they're wanting to run the vacuum for you, they're wanting to take the trash out, they're wanting to do those little things that you're not thinking about at that time. You're so enveloped in your grief. It's just that's all you can think about. And so whenever they can come in there and do those things for you, and there's not a better gift that they can do for you. And sometimes, saying thank you to them is not enough. And I think that, like whenever we talk about the funerals, it's just, and I think I was telling my staff the other day, I said, there's a timing. I said, so, during those 4 days, you have hundreds of people that are coming there and they're crying with you, they're laughing with you and things like that. I said, but on that 5th day, I said, a lot of times people are sitting there by themselves because everybody has to go home and has to go back to their lives. I said, and so whenever you work, you weave your way of being able to reach out to these people, whether it's through a friend, a cousin, a brother, or sister, someone like that. I think that's the time that's really an opportune time to reach them, because all of the support is gone at that point. And so I think they're sitting there and they're thinking about things a lot. And I think sometimes those memories might go back into that wrong place. And so I think that's a good time to maybe reach out to a friend or a trusted source and try to offer them some comfort.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So again, postvention is interventions that are conducted after a suicide completion. It is a form of services or supports for those grieving or experiencing post-traumatic stress from the event. It helps the community heal from the traumatic event. There are components to a postvention plan: prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. The main thing is here that postvention is a community activity is to remember that postvention is comprised of a team of relevant community agencies from the list that we created in that poll. Those are some key people that should be in your team. And a host agency should lead the activities or even the planning of your postvention plan. And right now, Native Connections should be the host agency or one of the main agencies in there. And school and community collaboration is key. Strengths-based postvention. Every community has its strengths and resources. Postvention is about reminding people of these strengths, and it's helping people find the resources that are available to help. Again, going back to what Anthony said, is maybe somebody that's going to come in and vacuum your home for you before you open your home, to have these people come in and pay their respect to the person that is deceased. There are people who will need assistance on what you can do and all about and what you can on your postvention, and that's what this grant is about. Focus on the capacity of what we have in our community. So I'm going to turn this over to Joe Lewis for our last poll question.
Thank you, Vicki. So this is our second and last poll question for the webinar. So what are some of the strength-based resources in your community? So please put your answers in below, and we'll broadcast the results after we give you some time to type in your answers. Thank you. So we're going to broadcast the results now, and I'll let Vicki give some time to go over your answers.
Thank you, Joe. It looks like we have lots of beautiful resources in our strength-based resources in our communities. We have, of course, our Native connections, tribal offices, our culture, close-knit, family, friends, community members, our tribal identity. One person put their tribal identity, it's fully intact and not fragmented. Kinships, where most are related and thereby the trust factor exists. The Canoe Club, the Shaker Church, crisis counselors, spiritual elders, behavioral health elders, cultural community centers, and gender-specific groups. Those are just some very good strength-based resources in the communities. Remember that when you take the time to think about these things, that you have probably more strength-based resources in your community than you probably thought of at first. Sorry, just that.
Okay, so that is going to close up our voting on the poll, and I will send it back to Vicki. Thank you.
So some key activities that you probably want in your post-vention plan are, you wanted to offer support to families and friends of the victims. You wanted to identify vulnerable relatives and family and offer counseling. And enlist the support of media in a positive way. A community should consider postvention as part of their suicide prevention planning rather than trying to develop a response immediately after a suicide. So you want to have this developed beforehand. The community will need to understand the risk and protective factors. Again, knowing those is very important. And knowing what a suicide contagion is, and to develop the strategies to reduce these and enhance the protective factors. I always want to say you want to have so many protective factors for a community, for individuals, that they look like the Michelin Man, that you just all these round things, and that you have to wobble to go get anywhere, that you're just so full of protective factors that you look like the Michelin Man. The CDC offers guidelines for preventing suicide contagion, and also a good resource is the book, The Day to see the. Oh, I'm going to mess it up again now, but it's I referenced it at the beginning. I'm sorry, I'm messing it up. To see the great day that dawns. So again, these are some portions of your Postvention, is to have some recovery activities. And this is what happens after addressing the immediate needs of community members. You want to have some counseling, maybe people to get together in an area where you're going to have people, like here we have Dave and Deborah, in case this triggers anybody. And you want to have people that are able to do some counseling and just be there for the family or others that may be affected by this event. Some suicide awareness programs to educate the community about the symptoms of suppression, the causes of suicidal behavior, just doing some positive education about suicide prevention, suicide, substance misuse, all those things that go along with this as well. There's always challenges in postvention planning. This is an event that, a topic that impacts everyone, so you want to keep it positive, strength-based. And you want to look at the community readiness, getting the right agencies involved. And, when you're involved in this, some of the knowledge that you have just leaves your head. So, and then in the beginning, some people are going to lack the knowledge of what to do. And when you talk about community readiness, sometimes your community just isn't ready to talk about suicide, and then you have an event like this, and then it multiplies, and the lack of knowing what to do, and then the lack of not wanting to even admit that this was death by suicide, it makes it really challenging. So you want to have your postvention plan in place, and once they're in place, you may want to practice these. Yes, it sounds silly, but I grew up in Billings, Montana, and there's 3 refineries that surround Billings, and there's a group that get together and they have mock catastrophes and what to do if one of their refineries burns up, blows up, or a train drives into one of the refineries. So how can we practice our postvention planning is that you can get your team together and you can, they call them tabletop practices, and Barbara Aragon, who is on our team, is great at this. And I know that she would be a great resource for this if you have any questions on how to do this. But what you do is just put your plan into place. Who would you call? Where would you have a meeting place? Who would you put as your point of contact for your media? Just, act your plan out. And again, how do we do this in Indian communities? Just like we do a lot of things that we do in Indian communities. We pull together as a community and we help support the people that are hurting. So I'm going to turn this over to Joe Lewis that ends my part of the presentation for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki. So this is our webinar Q&A session. And the session, if you have a question to ask, please type it in the chat box at the bottom right of the webinar window. Or you can unmute your phone by pressing #6 to ask a question. And then please press *6 to remute your phone line. So we'll take a moment to give people a chance to unmute their phone lines or type their questions in the chat box.
Sorry.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
May I ask a little bit more information about who Barbara Aragon is, please?
Barbara Aragon is a Native Connections coordinator, and she's been in prevention and healing and Native communities for a number of years. She's done GONAs. She's just a great resource out there. But when we send out the slide deck, the presentations, the coordinators will get those out to you. We can send out her information as well.
Thank you very much.
While we're waiting for more questions to come in, I just wanted to let everyone know that if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, check with your Native Connections coordinator, and they'll be able to email you a copy. Thank you. So we have one question that came in from Cheryl on the web address. There's a web address at the end of the slides, which are still coming up. But they will be some time for the presentation to be uploaded, so it won't be there right away. But if you'd like the slide deck, please contact your Native Connections coordinator, and they can get you the slide deck. Thank you.
I'm unmuted. Julia, I see your question in the chat box. How would an agency such as Native Connections be supported to families without being intrusive to their cultural and personal family matters related to the burial? As Anthony said, a lot of times, families will have a person, a point of contact. A lot of times that family member or that point of contact will kind of just emerge naturally. So if that happens, of course, reach out to that person. And this is a tough question too, because, you don't want to be intrusive, but you want the family to know that you're there for them to give their support. So, always, just always try to let them know that you're there. And sometimes, you don't necessarily need to bring up their culture or personal family beliefs for that, and just, get the information out the best that you can. I hope that answered. Deborah or Dave, do you have a response to this as well? Press pound 6 to unmute your lines if you have a response. Rufus Spears responded and said, maintain a presence in the community by promoting life and the tribal identity. Mm-hmm. And that is true. Native Connections is to Cohort 2. This is new to you in your communities, but hopefully after a couple of years, this isn't new, and this is something that people will know that they can reach out to, and will know that it's something you'll have that presence in the community, and they will know to reach out to you.
Hi, Vicki.
Yes?
Hi. You talked about practicing postvention activities, and you mentioned some tabletop practices. Do you have reference material or some examples of those tabletop practices anywhere?
We can get you some, yes.
Okay, thank you. That would be great. I would love to see those too, please.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Vicki. This is Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, David.
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry. I was on mute, and then I tried to unmute myself here, and I just was want to respond to Julia's question, and I can say that the folks that we have on the team with the Native Connections coordinators, I think with our Native background and such, we really want to be sensitive to families and communities and that have to deal with suicide completions and postvention efforts. So it's really hard to answer the question, but I think it's best to say that we are well versed and have a good understanding, I think, in terms of the way that we try to approach the tribal communities, because this is such a difficult area to deal with. So, and I think we all have been impacted by by suicide in the tribal communities. So it's a great question. I don't think there's one answer that fits. But thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Dave.
We'll give a little bit more time while we see people typing in the chat box, and then we'll conclude our questions and answer session. Okay, I see that we're not having any more questions answered, so we're going to go ahead and finish and wrap up our question and answer session and the webinar. So our next webinar will be Community Readiness Model Part 1, March 7th, 2017, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we'll have the Community Readiness Model Part 2, March 14th, 2017, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Community Readiness Model Part 3, March 21st, 2017, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And finally, Community Readiness Model Part 4, March 28th, 2017, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Visit our website where the different webinars will be uploaded to the website so you can download them. Thank you for your time. Please follow this link to provide feedback for today's webinar. And we're going to have Hunter come on to say the closing statement.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
First, before I share these words, I want to thank everyone for the work that you're doing in Indian country on behalf of our youth and our families and our communities. There's a lot of loss that's happening in Indian country, not only suicide, but to alcohol or drugs or land or resources. A lot of things that have happened recently in Indian country that has created a lot of grief. And, so I just want to thank everyone that participated on this webinar, and thank you for what you are doing, and then all of our coordinators and staff as well. So I'm going to do my best to close this in my language. Ani Gajamdo, Ajustan Edition Kaz, Wabaja Shido Dem, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and Dojavan, Shinabe, Saginaw Swan Creek, Black River Band, Minwa, Grand River Band, Odawa, Shinabe, and Dow. Chimigushka Vigiak, Mount P. Magija. Chimigushka Vigiak, Mount P. Nangwom. Namada, the Mino Gija got the Minoan, Namada, the Mino Ziwi got Namada. Up to go, the Mino Gija got within the Nigize, Niguanan, Nishkuming. And what I just said is to give us all strength to pray to be good today, to be happy, to carry our prayers on the wings of that Ngizi, that sacred bird, that eagle, on behalf of us to the Creator. So those are the words that I shared. And thank you for asking me to do this. It's been an honor to share these words for everybody. Miigwech.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Hunter. This will conclude our webinar for today. Please reach out to your coordinator to get the PowerPoint and slide deck. Thank you.